Think back to that first day. You know, the day you were born. Were you born with any rights? And why is it that human beings, if we are truly born with rights, natural rights, inalienable rights, like life, liberty, and not to be tortured, then why is it for the last 200,000 plus years we have not had those rights? Or people have been fighting. Even today, millions upon millions of people, you may know even on social media around the world, are struggling for those rights. Let's explore those questions together. Stay tuned. This is Hazem Kira with Timeless Wisdom, The Joy of History, author of Timeless Wisdom, Quotations from East and West, and your personal historian. So, tell me if these words sound familiar. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This, of course, comes from the U.S. Declaration of Independence, penned primarily by Thomas Jefferson, and embodies the very principle of natural rights, that you and I are born with these rights. Rights that cannot be taken away or not be given, that you are just born with them as a human being. So, first, did the Founding Fathers truly believe in natural rights for all? Men, women, or just some? Let's take a look. In the Declaration of Independence, also known as a Great Divorce Letter to England, no greater words have received attention than Jefferson's phrase, all men are created equal. But the equality promised in the Declaration was denied, not only to African Americans, but other minorities as well as women. Interestingly, we see in the first election, George Washington, the first president of the United States, was actually voted in with less than 2% of the population. So only 43,000 people out of the 3 million population of the US at that time voted. 43,000. That's like a small city in the United States. Antelope, California has more than 43,000 people, and it has antelopes. Tell us what city you're coming from and the population in the comments below. But not everyone just stood there and allowed their rights to be taken away. For centuries and generations upon generations, one group after the other have been fighting for those rights, and each time referencing the Declaration of Independence and the words thereof.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Even First Lady Abigail Adams, in a letter in March of 1776, a few months before the Declaration, Abigail writes to her famous husband and she says, listen here, John, do not put such unlimited power into the hands of husbands. Oh, yeah, she did. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation. That word sound familiar? It should. Remember the slogan of the revolution? No taxation without representation. But not only did John Adams fail to take his wife seriously, he scoffed and said, as to your extraordinary code of laws, I cannot but laugh. Oh, no, you didn't, John. You slept on the couch for a few months for that one. He continues with, we have been told that our struggle has loosened the bands of government everywhere. And listen carefully here to these sentiments, that Indians slighted their guardians, assuming, of course, that Native Americans or Indians needed guardians. It's kind of like the mafia. You need guardians or protection. And if you don't pay us protection, we will burn down your village. And listen here carefully. This is very important. And Negroes grew insolent to their masters. Adams basically assumes that all African Americans or Negroes, not the N-word here in this case, by the way, that all African Americans have a master. And therefore, this is why, in the end, African Americans, even those who are born free in the North, will not be given the same natural rights as a white man with property. And finally, he says, we know better than to repeal our masculine or patriarchal systems, which would completely subject us to the despotism of the petticoat. And by despotism of the petticoat, of course, he means the tyranny of women. The irony, of course, is that because natural rights is so engraved in the Declaration of Independence and in the spirit of the Constitution, that group after group would fight for those rights. 150 years later, we see in the 19th Amendment women having the right to vote. And a little bit before that, very interestingly, about 50 years before, African American men and men of color would also get the right to vote before white women. So, what do you think? Are men and women equal? Have they reached today parity or equality, economically, socially, politically? What groups today do you think face challenges to their natural rights? Write down what you think in the comments below. To be clear, the principle of natural rights did not come from Thomas Jefferson. He borrowed from the great minds that came before him, especially the great Enlightenment thinker John Locke. John Locke believed that all individuals were born, and tell me if it sounds familiar, with fundamental rights. And he, according to him, his three primary were life, liberty, that's already 2 out of the 3 that Jefferson used, and for him, property. Unlike Jefferson, who includes the pursuit of happiness. Locke continued by arguing that the purpose of government, the only real reason that it exists, is to protect your natural rights. And that if someone, including the government, tries to take it away from you, you have the right, according to John Locke's principle, to resist. You have a right. Somebody tries to take away your life, you have the right to resist. But also, according to Locke, people must obey the rules of their rulers. Locke argued for a sort of social contract. That is a contract, a agreement between the people and the government. And we'll talk more about that in future videos. Feel free to subscribe, and please also press that bell so you can be notified for future videos. That said, even Locke formulated his principle of natural rights by borrowing from the great cultures and generations that came before him. He looked at the English Bill of Rights and the Magna Carta, that the great Christian philosopher Saint Aquinas, and even the Muslim scholars from centuries before. The great Christian thinker Thomas Aquinas was born in 13th century Italy. He argued that we are all born with 7 basic goods, including life. We have the right to our life, and almost a natural right. He also argued that we have the right to educate one's offspring, to seek God or religion, to live in society, to avoid offense, and to shun ignorance. And in the 12th century, the Maqasid Sharia argued that there were 5 basic rights. Those include life, property, tell me if those sounds familiar, religion, intellect, and lineage. Great scholars like Ghazali and Imam Shatibi and Averroes, also known as Ibn Rushd, discussed these ideas. If you are interested in learning more, you can find many of the references in the notes below. But first, from my historical perspective. The source of our basic human rights is a subject that none of us can escape. As Princess Latifa of Dubai recently said, those of us who have it, we take it for granted, and those who don't, it is very special. After the U.S. Declaration of Independence, a number of countries adopted this principle of natural rights. Even international bodies like the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights also took this principle. But still till today, countries and societies are debating what this means. Supporters of natural rights argue that irrespective of any difference, that no one deserves to be treated with prejudice or abuse or discrimination. But the truth is that throughout history, social and economic inequality has been a constant. But also a constant has been the right to refuse and to resist those inequalities. That said, more men, women, and children today have protections not enjoyed throughout most of human history. But if history has taught us anything, it is that people must resist. That said, resistance does not necessarily mean only by force, but rather through engaging society at every level. In fact, history also tells us that most revolutions do not end up well. So it has to be, as Professor Eva Bowen says, democracy must be the work of forces on the ground who daily make their own calculations of the costs and the benefits of mobilizing collective power and challenging the status quo. But does that mean that everyone has a right, a natural right to a democratic form of government? Were our ancestors merely ignorant or unenlightened about natural rights? The fact is, it's not necessarily good versus evil, but often it is just both sides fighting for what they think is best for society at that time. That said, the debate over natural rights starts off as a very simple idea, but once implemented becomes very complex. For example, should we have a one world government that protects the rights of everybody in the world? Universal health care, universal education? That said, there are no simple answers, only food for thought. If you like this video, if you learn anything, please be sure to like below and hit the bell next to the subscribe button for future videos. This is Hazem Kira, and bon appetit.